Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar on condo repairs and maintenance. Is my condo up to par? Today, we have an esteemed panel here with us. We're going to be going over many questions, and also we're going to be here to answer any of your questions. We're giving our registrants just about a minute or two to log in, give everyone the opportunity to log in before we do the formal introductions and get our webinar started. If this is your first time attending one of our webinars, you do have a Q&A at the bottom or top of your screen. Feel free to use the Q&A to put any questions that you may have. The panel and myself will do our best to answer those questions. If we're unable to answer those questions, you will have our contact information. You can reach out to us and we'll do our best to be able to guide you in the right direction, the right path, or help you answer those questions. Again, thank you very much for being today. We're going to give it just about 1 minute and we'll get started with today's webinar. All right, for those registrants just logging in, the participants are flooding in. We're giving everyone just about a minute to get started. Today's webinar, we're going to be going over condo repairs and maintenance. Is your condo up to par? We have the pleasure of having an esteemed panel with us here today. We're going to do formal introductions in just about a minute. If you have any questions that you'd like answered during today's webinar that are related to the topic, feel free to use the Q&A button that's located either at the bottom or the top of your screen. We'll do our best as a panel to answer those questions. If we're unable to do so, feel free to reach out to one of us and we'll do our best to be able to answer your questions or at least put you in the right path to someone that can help answer that question. So with further ado, why don't we get started? So again, thank you all for being here today. My name is Rafael Aquino. I have the pleasure of being here with these excellent group of individuals who are ready and prepared to answer your questions. So why don't we get started with some formal introductions? Why don't we give the lady first the opportunity to introduce herself and the organization she represents. Lisa, be so kind to give our participants a little bit of information on yourself and the firm.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Lisa Elk and I'm with Alliance Association Bank. And just remember, our middle name says it all. We only do association deposits and loans all throughout the United States. But when you're working with Alliance Association Bank, think of the A, B, and C. A, association only products and loans. B, better business financing for those repairs and maintenance. And C, convenience, where we bring the resources of the bank to you. So with Lisa at AAB, it's one focus and one expertise, and that's time and money savings for your communities. Thank you.
Excellent, Lisa. I always love your introduction, by the way. Next up, we have the pleasure of having Steve from Rosenbaum. So Steve, if you'd be so kind to give an introduction of yourself and the firm.
Sure. Thank you, Rafael. I'm Steve Brayton. I'm the shareholder at Rosenbaum PLLC that oversees our association practice group. We are a full service law firm that panel and to discuss these very important issues.
Thank you, Stephen. Next up, I have on my screen David with Beachfront Painting and Waterproofing.
How you doing? I'm Dave with Beachfront Painting and Waterproofing, Vice President of Sales. I've been in South Florida for about 10 years in the painting, waterproofing, restoration, and roofing division for about 7. Pretty much all the east coast of Florida, specialize in protecting your building and keeping it from leaking so that you don't have as many repairs, or hopefully we can mitigate some of those.
Great. Thank you so much. Definitely a great asset to have here today. And next up, I have Hector Cruz with Forge Engineering.
Yes, hi there. Good morning, everyone. My name is Hector. I am a branch manager for Forge Engineering out on the East Coast. Forge Engineering is a group of innovative engineers, professional engineers, and we have our experience relates to assisting, helping some communities like yours with some of their issues, not only to identify the issues, but also to help you, to give you recommendations on how to best address some of these concrete restoration projects or whatever the needs might be. So thank you again.
No problem. Thank you so much, Hector, for being here with us today. As for myself, my name is Rafael Aquino. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Affinity Management Services. We are a community association management company. We focus on managing properties throughout Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County. We're more of a boutique organization. We have the resources that you'll find with the larger companies. However, with us, you'll be able to provide that personal touch that many associations are looking for. I do have an engineering background, so I have that expertise to be able to kind of break down any situation that your association have, put together a plan of action, and make sure that that gets executed properly. I'm able to do that with the excellent team that sits behind me and works and does everything on our behalf. So with further ado, why don't we get into the questions? Today, our webinar is about condo repairs and maintenance. And I know over the past 2 to 3 weeks, we've had many questions come to us, as I'm sure it has to the panelists, on what associations should be doing to avoid any damages or avoid the tragedy that occurred at Champlain Towers. The way I see it, we have a duty as professionals to really honor the lives of those that were lost in that tragedy and doing what we can to educate board members and making sure that this never occurs again. So a lot of the questions that we've received, and I know we were chit-chatting about it, Steve, before the webinar, is what do you believe like legislation is going to do? And if you can talk a little bit about, the importance of reserve study and what is the requirements for condos to have a study, and or what's the schedule that they should be doing that study as well?
Sure. So the Florida Condominium Act used to mandate that condominium associations obtain a reserve study every 3 years. And then the legislature removed that mandatory requirement. So, I would anticipate as part of, Tallahassee's look at this whole issue, that they will consider, making reserve studies mandatory again. But whether they're mandatory by statute or not, we have to keep in mind that the board of directors of an association has a fiduciary duty to maintain the common elements. And in order to meet that fiduciary duty, one component of that would be, of course, to do a reserve study on a regular basis, whether it be 3 years or 5 years. I wouldn't go beyond 5, to make sure that the board understands what their deferred maintenance and capital expenditure requirements are for their particular condominium, and that their reserves are in line with their future needs. And one of the other things that I think could potentially happen, I'm not sure Tallahassee will go this far, is they may regulate how frequently the association can waive the funding of reserves, because we see that all too often where the membership kicks the can down the road because they don't want to spend the money funding the reserves. And then when it comes time to do a major capital improvement project, such as concrete restoration, the money isn't there.
Correct.
And they're forced to specially assess, finance the project. And I think that whole picture, may change down the road. I know buyers are very savvy, and they're going to be looking at how is the association I'm looking to buy into funding their reserves? Do they have reserves? Are they fully funded? So I think those questions are going to be top of mind, for buyers in the near, as we move forward.
Correct. And I could totally see that. I think that's an excellent point that you bring up. And I do want to ask a question, keep it with you here, Steve, from
Sure.
Paul. Paul says, do you think Tallahassee will make reserve studies and reserves mandatory after what occurred at Seaside?
Well, I think they should. I mean, I think that's a real easy one because it used to be in the statute. So putting it back shouldn't be very controversial. So I do think so. I think they should. And I think 3 years is reasonable. Before I forget, one of the things I do want to mention, Raphael, is that when it comes to budgeting and doing and creating your reserve schedule for your budget, which the Condominium Act requires the board to do. So every budget that the board sends out on an annual basis has to include a reserve schedule. And the budget has to show the reserves being fully funded. So only the membership can waive the funding of reserves, not the board. So there's this great manual that the Department of Business and Professional Regulation has online, and it's called Budgets and Reserve Schedules, a Self-Study Training Manual, which you can't really see. But it's a great resource. It's got a table of contents. So even though it's a bit long, you can go right to what you may be looking for. And, if anybody that attends today wants a copy, Katie Phillips, our Director of Education, can provide that to you and you can send it out to anybody who wants it. But I strongly recommend people take a look at that.
Great, excellent. That was a great nugget of information there. Now, Hector, I know we have a lot of managers on our call as well as board members, and they may not have a good understanding when it comes to the reserve study and how it's broken down. Can you give a little bit more detail with regards to the schedule and how that schedule is put together? The reserve schedule? You're on mute.
Yes. Yes, the reserve study, it's a program where you try to anticipate for some of the the expenditure or the cost of some projects that need to be have a specific lifespan, and that therefore will need to be either repaired or replaced at some point in the future. So the idea of the reserve study is to plan and assess those elements first of all, and then come up with a plan over time to save for those components. Those components are kind of limited. There is a way to like a kind of a test that the property managers can follow to determine if it needs to be. Those building components are the roof, the paint, the pavement, and then anything else that is greater than the replacement or the repair maintenance is greater than $10,000. But there is an additional requirement, is that it needs to be in the common areas. It needs to have a limited useful life, and that's about it. So when we go out there to meet with the management, we in our services, we do an evaluation of those components in trying to determine the remaining life that there is to those components before we start looking into any previous reserve studies, if that's the case. Or it's never too late to get started with a reserve study. So if it is for the first time, then we have the burden to try to come up with a description of the life expectancy for those components and put that into the reserve. So it all depends. It is on a case-by-case basis on every building.
Yeah, I know I can speak from the management side that having a reserve study definitely makes our lives much easier, because it gives us a better understanding of what we can expect, and it allows us to really plan as a management company and guide our clients much better. It's important for all board members and managers that you have to have strong partnerships. You can't count on your managers or management to really know it all. I understand that you're nonprofit organizations and your role is you believe the role is to really keep the fees low. But in reality, the main role is not only to enhance the property, but also maintain the safety of the residents that live there. And maintaining that safety does mean maintaining the components that are within that property. So working with strong partners, engineering partners, banking partners, attorney partners, restoration partners, it allows for a much stronger relationship and allows for a much better work to be done, or I should say projects to be managed for your particular community. And also it makes it a little bit easier for you as a board member and a manager, because you have professionals that you can rely on to answer the questions that they're really experts at. And with that said, Steve, I wanted to ask, many times when you get a reserve study, or let's say a manager puts a board on notice that something needs to get done, what's the board's role once they have been put on notice that either from a reserve study or either from a manager's report or the county that puts them on notice? What's their responsibility as board members once they know that these maintenance items are there and that they have to be repaired?
Right. So, once the board has been put on notice of a maintenance issue, the board has a duty to act. And depending on the severity of the issue, when you talk about, for example, if a governmental entity has gotten involved and cited the association for, violating the zoning code, they need to act immediately because they're going to get fined. If it's brought to their attention that there's a potential safety issue, obviously we've learned the hard way that those issues need to be addressed immediately. The days of kicking the can down the road, I think, are over. Okay. And the association board has always had a fiduciary duty, and it's a non-delegable duty to maintain, repair, and replace the common elements. And so the focus needs to be, while I understand boards have to be cost conscious, we also have to balance that with safety.
Mhm.
And if there is a safety issue and the board does not address that issue and somebody's injured, then rest assured that the insurance carriers are going to find a way to deny coverage when a claim is made. So I think that it's important to act. I think it's important to consult the appropriate professional, depending on the nature of the maintenance, repair, or replacement issue, and that the board rely on the professional advice of those folks. Because when the board relies on the advice of professionals, it is discharging its duty. It's now protected as a board from liability because they've sought out the proper advice. They've followed that advice. They can't be faulted if the advice was wrong.
Mhm.
So that's critical. And then when we talk about the actual funding of reserves, a lot of communities may say, hey, we've been waiving reserves for a long time. And so how do we get in the game, so to speak? How do we start funding those reserves? Do we have to start funding them 100% per the reserve study at once? Or can we phase in the funding? And certainly, depending on the age of your building and the issues you have, you can phase in reserve funding. You don't have to go 100% year one.
Yeah.
You may want to go 50% year one, so that there isn't this monetary shock to the membership where they see their dues increase exponentially. But I can't emphasize enough to those associations who have not been funding reserves that they need to start doing it. The money needs to be there for these projects. And the other thing that Hector may want to touch upon is the different methods of funding reserves. There's the line item method versus the pooling method, and there's advantages, to the pooling method that folks may want to hear about.
Correct. And you bring up some great points, Steve. I mean, also from a marketability perspective, I'm sure banks are going to start looking more into, they always look into in order to get FHA approvals if there's reserves. And most banks that are going to lend are also asking these questions. But more than ever, owners are now have opened their eyes and say, okay, if I'm going to be purchasing into an association, do I want to be assessed 10, 20, 30, 40, $50,000? They may start asking these questions, as you mentioned earlier, Steve, with regards to the reserve study. They're probably going to become much more savvier, and so are their realtors, to ask these questions. So it's important to keep, all factors into consideration. Now, Hector, with what occurred at Champlain, we've had many questions with regards to, what occurs when there's like a life safety or there's a safety issue. What does an engineer do to make the board aware of it? And also, is the engineer required to report it to, let's say, the county if it's in such a bad shape, or the city, depending where the building's located? You're on mute, Hector.
Yes, hi there. That's a good question. As professional engineers, we have a duty, not only with our clients, but with the society, to ensure the life safety of everybody. And when it comes to doing general assessments, we look for, the general condition of a building can, with age, can have, as you would expect, can show signs of aging. However, we are looking for clues that might be indicative of distress or severe distress that may need some kind of a major repair. There is a difference between doing preventive maintenance and to having issues that need major structural repairs. So we look at both of those conditions, and whenever we are hired or retained by an association, since they are our clients, we have the obligation to notify them of whatever those findings are, along with recommendations. At the end of the day, it's not just a matter of sharing necessarily bad news. It's also trying to give them the professional opinion on what needs to be done. So that is probably the initial step that we normally take. Now, when it comes to 40-year recertifications, that's a different process that we are supposed to comply or follow a certain checklist that is established by the county. And at the end of the process, the building has to show that they have done their due diligence to comply with whatever deficiencies are, not only to identify those deficiencies, but then to address those deficiencies in a timely manner. So that's a process that where we work as a team along with the association and present those findings and recommendations to the local jurisdiction for that matter.
Correct. And I know, many board members or managers could feel, overwhelmed when they receive these reports because, firms such as yourselves, you're very thorough in the work that you do. You outline, you show pictures. You basically really give a clear picture of what needs to be done. But one thing that needs to be kept, front of mind is that these things take time. Even though you're working with industry experts and professionals, you have to give yourself ample time as a board or as a manager to put, the team together, like kind of like basketball, putting your dream team together. You don't just recruit team members just one day to the next. So depending where your building is, you shouldn't wait to just about the 40-year mark. Okay, I'm getting to my 40-year now. I'm going to start working on putting that team together. No, in my opinion, you should start working 33 years, 34 years in, and start getting all your ducks in a row so that you're prepared and you have a strong understanding of how you're going to manage the situation that you're currently in. I know it may seem like a lot, but again, if you're working with the right partners, they're going to give you the guidance and the education to be able to walk you through it and show you what the true timelines are really like. Now, Lisa, we've had several questions here when it comes to financing. So how does an association, deal with it? So let's say they get their engineering report, they have an idea of what the cost is going to be, but they don't have the necessary funds. What other options do they have available to them to be able to cover that expense that they have to cover?
Right. So banks that work with associations, they really offer two different types of products. There's the construction line of credit to a permanent loan, and then there's a term loan. So if you are doing a project and you want to get the line of credit, depending on what the loan amount is. For instance, if you're doing a 40-year research project and Hector has identified, or your engineering firm has identified all these various projects, electrical upgrades, painting, maybe paving, etc., that's all been identified, then you can do a construction line of credit. The advantage to doing that is it's interest only during that construction period. Well, we are in South Florida, and most of the time we give a 1-year construction line of credit. However, you do have the weather factor that can actually impact the timing of the construction project. So we have been able to go out to 18 months. So let's say you do complete the project, maybe you complete it in 11 months. Then that particular loan terms out, and then you actually start paying back on the loan. So during the construction period, you're only paying interest only. And then on the term portion, you're paying both principal and interest. So once it terms out, then you have options as few as 3 years all the way up to 15 years. However, with most 15-year loans, there is usually what's called a rate reset. So after 7.5 years, then the rate will change. If you want to fix that rate, then you're going to want to look at maybe a 7 or 10-year term option. So there's different financing options that are available to actually finance these projects.
Okay. And I have a question here from from George towards you with regards to, will banks require condos to have adequate reserve funding before considering loans to the association?
In the past, I would have said we didn't even consider, like if there were no reserves, we didn't really consider that we could do the loan. but we changed that and when we now look at a liquidity factor. So if your annual budget is $100,000, we want to see at least $20,000 in liquid accounts. Now with what happened with the tragedy at Surfside, we're considering looking at making sure that that reserves have not been waived. But right now, I would say it's a case-by-case basis. So I like to say right now, it depends. But the liquidity is one of the main credit factors that our bank is looking at, and we're looking at a 20% liquidity factor.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm sure many things are going to change with what had occurred, and banks are also going to be, doing what they can to protect themselves as well if they're providing a loan. So again, important information to keep front of mind. Now, Steve, whenever you're getting a loan, I know part of our recommendation for management is, as we're working with the bank, again, who's going to be our attorney partner, because, we need to find out if we're going to pass a special assessment, is it permitted, the documents to allow it, what are the steps that need to be taken? So if you can give, our listeners an idea of from the attorney side of what an association should be looking at when they're trying to get funding and potentially passing a special assessment.
Yes. So when an association is looking to finance a capital improvement project, one of the first things it should do is check with legal counsel to verify they have the authority to obtain a loan without membership approval. That's a key factor. Secondly, if we're going to be paying the loan back through a special assessment, we want to make sure the board has the legal authority to levy that special assessment for the project without an owner vote. Okay. If an owner vote is required, then the association is going to need to obtain that vote. Typically, except in older documents, the board has the authority to levy a special assessment without an owner vote. And the board is going to have to take a few steps along the way to finalize that loan process. One, it's going to have to notice a board meeting with the appropriate amount of time to authorize the association to take the loan, to approve the loan documents, to authorize certain, the president and secretary to sign the loan documents. And there's going to be some resolutions that the bank is going to have in their loan package that are likewise going to have to be approved. And they're also going to need to approve legal counsel issuing a loan opinion letter, because no bank is going to close on a loan, particularly a loan in the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, without an opinion from legal counsel that the association has the authority to take the loan and that they've taken the appropriate steps to approve the loan. And so from that standpoint, as counsel, we're taking on a significant amount of risk, because we're basically saying to the bank, they have an enforceable loan.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, that's what they care about. They want to know that if we loan you $1 million and you default, we have the ability to come in and take control of the assessment revenue and pay ourselves back, which is exactly what they're going to do if there's a default. So, the loan opinion letters need to be factored into the cost of the project, because there is a level of risk being taken on by the law firm, whoever that law firm is, to issue that opinion letter. And so if we're considering, financing the project, these things should be talked about up front. I can't tell you how many times that the clients come to me after they're way into the process and say, okay, we need a loan opinion letter. And I'm like, okay, well, wait a minute. I got to see, did you do all these things up to this point correctly? Yeah. And there's been a number of times where we've had to redo some things in order for me to write that opinion letter and feel comfortable about writing it. So you bring up some, that's a really good point that needs to be on the board's radar when they're going through that process.
Correct. And you bring up a great point there, Steve, when you get put into those positions. What I've noticed over the years is when you're put in those positions, it's, they didn't have the experience. And again, that's where it boils down to making sure that you have the strong team, alongside you to be able to guide you through this process, so that, everything takes time. It's things don't just happen overnight. We have to give each vendor the opportunity, or each partner the opportunity, to do what he or she needs to do. And we can't expect it just to happen overnight. So it's important to have proper planning in all of this. Now, Dave, you've been real quiet for some time. I want to give you an opportunity because I know there are some questions here when it comes to the actual repairs and concrete repairs to it. So in terms of like, say, concrete repairs and maintenance, what are your recommendations for associations when they're looking to start a concrete restoration project?
Well, in preparation for it, it's exactly what you said. It's maintenance. Visual inspections on your building, address cracks, address rust that may turn into rebar spalls. If you have rebar spalls, address those as they come, and keep the size of your project down whenever it does come, because spalls don't get any smaller, cracks don't get any smaller. Have your maintenance team or a professional check out all the seals on the building, because water penetrates the building. It makes these projects a lot bigger. And like I said, they don't get any smaller. But as far as the structural elements, we'll do a visual inspection, repair, kind of maintain wherever we can. If it's a structural element, whether it's rebar or reinforcement, whatever it is, we call in a design professional like Hector. They kind of tell us what would be an emergency, what would be, kind of a maintenance thing, and what they need to address over time, and kind of go off of their scope of what they tell us to do and kind of what they expect the project to entail.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that, Dave. And what I do want to highlight is it's what David mentioned is it's very important to keep in mind is, I like to say that the paint is really the envelope of the building. And if you're maintaining that, you're maintaining the internal components. Now, that's not going to stop you from having stucco, bubble up and pop out. It doesn't stop everything, but it does protect your building from having that water penetrate. I also want to make another recommendation, and that is if you're going to have your maintenance crew do it, make sure that they have the experience on how to do it. And I would strongly urge, let's say, having the engineer take a peek at it, because you can't expect the maintenance crew to do everything. The last thing you want them to do is treat a rebar in a way that they should have never treated it. You think that it was done properly, and then you're finding yourself in a worse situation down the line. So again, we got to be balanced out where we can and just rely on the professionals. So Hector, with regards to, you say, your firm writing up the specifications, because there's different ways that we've seen engineers write up specifications for the projects. We've seen it where, you kind of do the binocular test, and where there's the other option where you do a little bit more destructive testing to understand a little bit more on the actual cost. Can you kind of give a high level when it comes to that, to the concrete restoration, the roofing, and the major building repairs, of how you spec that out?
All right, that's a good question. I guess that it's important whenever we get the call from like David or the associations, we do a general assessment and we sit down and explain, what the findings are, what the concerns are, and then we do that as the initial step to define a scope of work. It's important to define a scope of work, because if we don't define that, then we have a project that in a brief period of time could start to grow. And then, knowing what to expect, knowing what to anticipate, it's important. And that's part of what we try to include in our set of documents. It's important to understand that these bid documents, they are the basis for the contract documents, and they all are also become eventually the permit documents. So within those documents, another thing that the associations need to understand is that some of this work, you only do it every 15 years, and depending on the nature of the project. So we cannot afford to do it short off, because you're not going to have that opportunity again within the next 10 years. So we have to make sure that we are addressing or specifying the right material with the right quality and the right warranty according to the expectations of the client. So we take that all of that into consideration, and we include that into the bid specifications. We have, at the same time, when we are as professionals, we also have to make sure that whatever we're specifying is in compliance with the code. So that's another aspect, another reason why it's important to perhaps have that interaction between the contractor and a professional engineer like us to work together as a team to make sure that it's doable, it's feasible, it's something that can be done, and it's not going to create any issues in the future in terms of non-compliance. So we conduct our initial site visits. Sometimes it takes a couple of site visits, and we conduct what we call a visual inspection. We try not to be disruptive to the building or to the structure. Only we do that only when strictly necessary, and there has to be a reason for doing that. And it normally is to to dissipate or to confirm some of our concerns. There are a number of non-invasive techniques out there, like doing GPR, which we try to incorporate whenever possible. But sometimes it becomes inevitable to also, do some selective destructive testing, and we just do it in coordination with a contractor, so that then we make an informed decision. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's how the normal process of putting together the bid documents.
Sure. No, it definitely did. And I have a question here from John that says, do we recommend, RFP from engineers? And I definitely do. I mean, right. We have a contractor here, we have an engineer here, and they'll both agree that, who should be putting together specifications is going to be an engineer. It's a third party. They work in together, but they're different in different organizations, and they each have their own responsibility. You definitely don't want, in my opinion, you don't want the RFP being drafted out by the contractor that's actually going to do the work. Who should be drafting up the RFP is going to be your engineer. That way they can specify what the work that needs to be done, the type of work that needs to be done, the material that's going to be used, and then they'll have the understanding, and the contractor will have the understanding of how that material needs to be applied and so forth. Again, it's a team effort here, and you can't just rely on one individual, because we need to protect the association and their best interest as well. And with that said, Steve, we have the legal side of it. So let's say, we already have the 3 RFPs. The board and management are ready to move forward with 1 or 2 contractors or in negotiation. Can you talk a little bit about, the contract, what you'll be reviewing, and also what's your recommendation with regards to the contract? Is that something that should be done before the RFP, where we receive it during the RFP? If you can give, shine some light on that.
Sure. One of the things I do want to address before I discuss the actual contract process, and this is something I think, Raphael, you've been emphasizing, is when you're going to start a project like this, I think it's important to understand and formulate the scope of the project with the engineer, and understand what components of the building you're going to be potentially maintaining and replacing. And so, for example, I've had a number of projects recently where, in connection with concrete restoration, the association wants to also replace all the windows and sliding glass doors with impact, because let's say the building doesn't have all those, it doesn't have upgraded windows and doors. So, that's something that, if that's going to be part of the project, the client absolutely needs to talk to the association lawyer about first, because we need to understand who's actually responsible for maintenance of the windows and doors. Okay, because it's not always the association, it could be the unit owner. And you have certain issues about who can contract for the replacement of the windows and doors if it's the owner's responsibility. So we get into some legal issues there. The other thing you had mentioned earlier, I wanted to briefly comment on, is about maintenance personnel doing work on the building. Just remember, when your own folks do the work on the building, you're assuming the liability associated with that work. When you hire an outside contractor, such as Dave, this is his business, okay? And if he doesn't do it right, then, we're going to be looking to Dave, not to our maintenance personnel, which is basically ourselves. So, and Dave knows that. So he's going to be doing the job, a certain way versus the maintenance personnel. So that's, sometimes trying to cut corners, not necessarily even cut corners, but saving dollars ends up costing more in the long run. In ways we might not have thought of. But when it comes to the contract review and the construction contract review, sometimes I've seen it where the engineer puts the contract terms as part of the bid documents. And then sometimes I see that the contractor submits a proposed AIA contract and the engineer's bid specifications and general conditions become part of the contract documents. Whichever way it's formulated, it's incredibly important for legal counsel to review those contract documents on behalf of the association, because although the AIA contract is supposed to be a standardized uniform contract, I often see changes are made by the contractor.
Yeah.
And we need to look at those changes. More often than not, those changes are going to be in favor of the contractor. So, we want to make sure the playing field is even. We also want to make sure that all the warranties that the engineer expects the contractor to provide have been, followed through and incorporated into the contract. When we're talking about waterproofing and the concrete restoration, if it's a 5-year warranty, if we're talking about painting, typically it's a 10-year warranty. I want to see the specimen warranty that's going to be offered by the painting manufacturer, because there's going to be a warranty by the painting manufacturer in addition to the contractor's warranty. So we want to make sure that the association is protected from all angles. And there's another component that's extremely important is the insurance that the contractor is providing for the job. Do they have adequate liability insurance? Do they have umbrella coverage? Do they have workers' comp insurance?
Mhm.
They have auto insurance. Why do they need auto insurance? Well, they're going to be driving cars on our property. So all these things need to be looked at, and nothing should be left to chance. So.
Yeah, those are excellent points. And I have a question here from Herb, where Herb makes mention of should those findings from the engineering report be conspicuously posted for all members to view instead of just the board? My answer to that is really depending on the size of the condo. If you're over 150 units, a board should be posting that on the association's website. If you're not, we're all hopeful that now with what has occurred, there's going to be changes in the law, but we're hopeful that people are going to be, or board members are going to be a bit more transparent. However, as a resident, for those residents that may be on the call, you do have a right to make a records request if necessary to receive that report. I know that several of the properties that we manage that are above the 40-year, they're in their 45th, 44th, where they've completed it and they're already in talks of their 50. We had records requests left and right out of the beginning because people didn't know that it was on their website. We had to let them know, hey, it's on the website. But yes, every member does have the ability to receive that information. Hector, I'm going to throw it right back at you before I go back to Lisa. We've had many questions here with regards to the GPR that you mentioned. If you can provide some clarification on what that testing is for our audience.
Yes, GPR is a service. By the way, we don't offer that service ourselves. We just, as an engineering company, we coordinate that. There are a number of third-party companies out there that does that type of service. In essence, it stands for it's kind of like a radar where they scan the surface of concrete reinforced elements like columns, beams, slabs, and those are the reinforcing bars that we can normally not see for obvious reasons. That kind of technology allows to detect where those bars are, not only to detect them, but also sometimes it provides a general idea of the depth and at times the diameter. Those things are important for our analysis when it comes to evaluating a structure. And that's, that's in a nutshell what it is.
Okay, excellent. And I'm sure that's a good test to have with what had recently occurred and have an understanding of what's going on with the internal conditions, right? Because there's only so much that you could see.
Exactly.
So the technology, I'm sure, is helping the engineers get a better assessment of what's going on inside of these structures. So Lisa,
if I may add on that regard, that keeping the original record drawing plans, there is no substitute for that.
Yeah, the as-built.
That's very important. And sometimes I have been to some associations where they only have hard copies. I strongly recommend that they invest on scanning those documents. They are important. Whenever you have a contractor or another engineer like us come on board, it helps a lot. And it sometimes the information is so clear that we don't need to then have to, request this other type of services. So our first choice is always, do you have those original record drawing plans? If not, you can also try to go to the city, try to see if you can get a copy. But I strongly recommend that if you have a hard copy for those documents, that make your effort to try to scan and make a digital copy of them for those, because then it's easy, it's convenient to share, and it makes our job much easier.
It makes everyone's job easier. I know we've had situations where you can't find this little leak and you have no idea where it's coming from, and you can look at the as-built and realize, hey, there's a plumbing line coming down there that no one knew. From a management side, it definitely does help. I can't imagine from the engineering side as well. So great recommendation on having that scan, Hector. Lisa, we all do our best from professional level, from an engineering, from a contracting, to try to stay within budget, right? Putting in the contingencies that Steve mentioned for both attorneys, for both, cost overruns. But things happen. It's construction, it's projects, and unfortunately, no one likes to hear the word change orders, but they do occur. So let's say you took out a loan and you're exceeding that amount. What does the bank do, or what can a board member, what steps can the board member take if they need excess funds or an additional funds to resolve that issue?
So in other words, the question was that they already have an existing loan and now
Yes.
they're realizing that they need more money.
That's correct, yeah.
That happens actually quite frequently with the concrete restoration projects, as David would attest to, is that concrete restoration is kind of like a surprise project. You don't really know what your total costs are going to be. So when they get the loan and they realize they need additional funds, then a lot of times what we can do is modify that loan for them and get them additional money. I had that happen with a condominium in Highland Beach. They were doing their concrete restoration project, and they realized that the extent of the rebar damage was far greater than what appeared on the outside. When they delved in and they were doing more of their testing, they realized they were going to need more money. So we were able to actually modify the loan for them. But when you're requesting a loan amount, you do want to factor in the costs of your professionals, of your attorney, of your engineer, cost overruns, etc. So you want to, it's a lot more expensive in the end and more time consuming if you have to basically adjust that loan amount. So if your project's going to be 100,000, but you're factoring in the engineer and you're factoring in this, you're factoring in that, you are going to want to request more like 125,000. So you have that flexibility in there. Now, if it turns out that you've requested a $1.6 million loan and now you need $3 million, then we're probably going to ask for some additional documentation to substantiate the financial strength of the community. Because there's a lot of credit factors that we look at when we're approving for a loan. And one of the most important one is the repayment plan. We want to make sure we're going to be repaid on that loan, whether or not they have to implement the special assessment for us to be repaid, whether they increase the regular maintenance, whether they add a line item to their budget. When we're approving for a loan, we want to make sure we're getting repaid. So the credit metrics that we really consider, one of the most importantly is we're going to take a 100-unit condo, for instance. And if they have more than 10% of their unit owners that are 60 days or more past due with their current payments, that's a big red flag. Because if their delinquency is that high already and they take out a loan, then they could be, that we may not get repaid. The second one we look at is the liquidity. If you have a $100,000 annual budget and you're keeping $10,000 in your bank accounts, what's happening with that other $90,000 that's part of your budget? So we look at the liquidity. Another thing we look at is the size. If you have 100 units versus 10 units, as you know, more homes provide for more diversified cash flow. And then the assessment increase. A large increase may cause the delinquencies to actually go up. So we look at that. We look at the annual assessments as part of the market value. The annual assessments should not be greater than 10% of the unit's value. We also look at the owner occupancy and concentration. And I know this is a big one in South Florida because there's a lot of leased units. But based on the leased units, as you know, if you don't have as much owner occupancy versus leasing, something happens in the economy and people stop paying, they're not going to stop paying on their primary residence. They're going to stop paying on their investor property. So we look at that. One of the biggest ones I'm coming across lately is the unit owner concentration.
Yeah.
So if you have a unit owner that there's 100 units and he or she owns 12 units, that's over 10%. What if that particular unit owner stops paying? Then right there, you're above your delinquency threshold. When you do have those delinquency issues, I always recommend that you work with your collection attorney, you work with your management company, and try to get those delinquencies reduced. So based on all those credit factors, that's how we look. And when we're getting ready to approve a loan.
Excellent. And Lisa, I want to ask also, and if you had to, let's say, modify that loan, as you mentioned earlier, I'm assuming the rate can also change, correct? Depending on the timing of when it needs to be modified?
That is correct, because depending on the economy and what's happening in the economy, as you know, last year with the pandemic, the interest rates were extremely low. We're emerging out of the pandemic. Interest rates could start trending upward. But right now, the interest rates are very low. So if you are having, if David identifies a bunch of projects that your community needs, then we're there to help provide the financing.
Of course. Again, we keep going and harping on the proper planning, right? And proper team to avoid these kind of costs that can come down the line. So Steve, you mentioned a couple of times in your discussion about the importance of insurance. You mentioned it with the AIA contracts. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about your recommended insurance requirements? And also an important point that should be in the contract with is, performance bonds and so forth, and how the contractor, what the potential cost is, like what should be considered in the agreement and so forth.
Yes, no, that's great. When an association is undergoing a major construction project, part of the contract requirements or the bid requirements, they should include both a performance bond and a payment bond. And I see sometimes that there's one but not the other, and I recommend both. And even though it may cost a little bit more money to have both, they serve different functions. So a performance bond is going to guarantee the performance of the contractor's work under the contract document, so that if the contractor, has some financial issue, crisis, whatever, and walks off the project, the insurer has to step in and complete the project. Okay. A payment bond, on the other hand, insures the association against the scenario where the general contractor doesn't pay his subcontractors. And under Florida construction lien law, ultimately the owner is responsible to pay those subcontractors. So to protect the association from having to pay twice, once the general contractor and then a subcontractor who's not paid by the general contractor, and having to go, you're in litigation with the general contractor, which is not where you want to be. A payment bond protects the association from that scenario. And it's usually 2.5% to 3% of the contract price to have those bonds in place with the project. And then, in terms of other insurance requirements, again, it depends on the scope of the project. But, if we're doing a major concrete restoration project, we're going to want to see that the general contractor has minimum limits of $1 million, $2 million for general liability. And I like to see at least $5 million as an umbrella policy, as well as their workers' comp and auto. And bear in mind that coverage is to protect the association in the event that while the contractor or subcontractors are on the project, cause damage to property or cause bodily injury to somebody. It is not insuring the work. Okay. In fact, most liability insurance policies have a your work exclusion. Okay. So a general contractor's work is not going to be covered by their insurance. If there is defective work, that's going to be pursuant to the warranty, and you're going to have to pursue the rights and remedies under the contract with the contractor for the defective work as identified by the engineer. Now, you want your engineer to have professional liability insurance because they're the person watching the general contractor. And so if the defective work is as a result of a failure of oversight by the engineer, sorry, Hector, you want to make sure that you have some recourse, there. Because at the end of the day, like I said earlier, the board, they're relying on the professionals. They're not out there inspecting the contractor's work to make sure it complies. They're not out there inspecting Dave's work to make sure he painted the building correctly. I mean, that's just not what the board can do. So, so all those pieces need to be in place. And even then, there can still be problems, but
Yep.
at least need to start off on the right foot. And that of course also depends upon hiring reputable contractors that have a good track record.
Correct.
One
I
other,
agree.
one other benefit to those performance bonds is it gets rid of all the fly-by-night contractors because it puts
Yeah.
me, I have personal, money skin in the game now because it's on me, not the company.
Correct. That's a great point, Dave. And that's what I wanted to highlight, that as a board. So, when we're going through these processes ourselves, where we're assisting, we're in the logistical part of it with the engineer and the attorney and the bank. One of the things that you'll find as a board, and you need to be aware of it, is it is going to weave out who you may want to select because you think it's the cheapest guy, but it may be the cheapest guy or gal because they're not able to get a performance. They're not able to do what they need to do in order to meet the obligations that are necessary for that association. So it's going to show you as a board and manager who the true players are, or depending again on the size of your community. And also you have to factor in that there is going to be a cost to that bond as well. And you need to work with your contractor on what that percentage or however they manage it, what the cost is associated to that, so that you can put that into your total cost for your particular project. One tip that I wanted to provide, I know Steve mentioned on the insurance side, I also wanted to mention within your contracts, you should be outlining, now that we're in the midst of hurricane season, is who's going to be responsible for demobilization, who's going to be responsible for that cost associated to that. Is that something already worked in or not? You want to have that outlined, because if you do get hit with the storm, last thing you want is, let's just say for round numbers, a demobilization cost of $20,000 that you never budgeted for. So you need to work with your contractors, the engineer, and that way you're advising Lisa and her team of what the total true cost is going to be. Again, contingency can have many colors. So depending on the size of your property and what you have going on, it's important, again, I can't stress enough, to be working with the industry experts so that they can give you this information and let you know how you need to prepare. So Dave, I want to keep it, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I'm sorry to jump in, but
No worries.
Sorry, before I lose this train of thought, when we talk about unanticipated expenses, the other thing that the board needs to look at when they're going into one of these projects is whether or not they have an incidental damage clause in their condominium documents. Because that's a biggie. That's one that's come up a number of times for my clients in the last 24 months that have been doing these projects. And so what an incidental damage clause is, for example, if the association is doing a balcony restoration project and the contractor has to chip into the unit and has to take up tile in the unit, okay, and the association has an incidental damage clause that has no financial limit on the amount of the incidental damage caused, the association is going to be retiling that owner's unit because chances are you're not going to be able to match the tile.
Yeah.
So that tends to be a cost that gets completely overlooked. And in your more modern condominium documents, we put a cap on that of somewhere between 1,000 per incident, or depending on what the owners will vote for. The other issue that's been coming up a lot lately, and you guys have probably run into this, is everybody likes to tile their balconies.
Yep.
Well, you can't do a concrete restoration project without taking up that tile. And again, now depending, I've run into this in a couple of older condominiums where the balcony is actually considered part of the unit as opposed to limited common element.
Yeah.
And they have an incidental damage clause. Now, all of a sudden, I'm responsible when I normally wouldn't be for having to pull up the tile on the balconies. Okay, so these are the kind of issues that are kind of lurking and if we don't talk to, if we don't look at those issues with legal counsel before we start the project, we're going to be in for a dollar surprise. I can just, you know.
No, those are excellent points, Steve. Go ahead, David. You wanted to jump in there?
Yeah, you brought up a great point, and somebody asked the question earlier. I can't find it, but it was about tile on balconies.
Yeah,
And if I could get rid of all of that in South Florida, I would. Because it leaks into the ground, it causes falls, and you can't see what's there until you chip up the tile. There used to be carpet as well as tile, and that's probably the two worst things you can have on a balcony.
Correct. And so I'll leave it with you then, David. In terms of preventative maintenance, can you tell us of what are your thoughts are on like waterproofing and painting to extend the maintenance life? I know I've expressed it a couple of times, and maybe if you could give them more the technical side of it.
Yeah, I mean, look, visual inspection every couple of years is really important. Keeping the building clean, keeping the salt air off of your building with a pressure cleaning. One of the big things that I do as well as painting and waterproofing is roofing. And a lot of these roofing warranties, you have to maintain it once or twice a year to keep the warranty. I don't know why it's not like that in the painting waterproofing world, but you know, if you can put a visual inspection once, twice a year, maybe even every other year, get on a regular schedule of pressure cleaning to keep the salt air off your building. Those things would extend the life of your building and the life of your concrete project quite a bit.
Okay, excellent. So I have a question here for you, Hector, and it was regards to like a project manager, and I wanted to get your opinion on what are your recommendations for engineering oversight during the projects? Do you think that there should be the engineer alone, or there should be a project manager? If you could give our listeners kind of what your recommendations are when you're overseeing the contractor's work.
So, I mean, that is another good question. I guess that it depends on the type of project. I would say that regardless, it's important to have like, we provide a service that is a line of service that is we become the authorized owner's representative. We are like an extra pair of eyes that make sure that the project is being done in accordance with the contract documents. And to do that, we provide periodic inspections where we go and inspect. It's important to make the clear distinction that the contractor is always responsible to coordinate directly with the building department or the local jurisdiction for some of what they are called mandatory required inspections. So we are just there to make sure, it's an extra pair of eyes to give the assurance to the owners, the associations, that the work is being done in accordance with the contract documents. When it comes to that, it's important to understand that depending on the nature or the type of project, and also on the structure that we're dealing with, there are some special inspections, and they are called like that, special inspections for certain task within a project, or what we call a threshold inspection. Threshold buildings are certain buildings which comply with certain requirements. They need to be exceed a certain amount height, 50 feet or taller, 3 stories or higher, and have an occupancy that has, I believe, 500 people at one point, or more, or over 5,000 square feet. So if your property meets these requirements, chances are that your next project will involve a threshold or a special inspector for that matter. So on that regard, I guess that it's important for somebody to look at the budget and the time frame, as in any project, and also the quality. And we, an engineering company like us, we are capable of doing that. Sometimes people look for a project manager. We can assist with that as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Hector. And I can't tell you how many times when we work with, engineers such as yourselves, and it's a big help to management, because many times, again, we get where boards want to try to save money, but, they try to put a lot of the pressure on the manager to resolve certain issues. And that's definitely not in our wheelhouse. That's not something that we should be doing. You're the expert. You're the one that understands how the product should be applied. You're working with the contractor. And more importantly, you're the one that's going to let the manager or the managing company, or for self-manage, the accounting firm to release the payment as well. So you'll be signing off, letting us know, yes, it's okay to cut the contractor another 10, 15, 20, whatever the percentage of work that's being done. So I think that that's an excellent point to making sure that board members keep in mind that there should be someone supervising the project. Once the project gets kicked off, it just doesn't run by itself. It needs to be managed by someone. I know in our world that there's some organizations that do offer the project management. I know we steer away from that. Our role really is to be the facilitators, to be able to coordinate amongst the professionals. And that project management should, in our opinion, be handled by an engineer, an outside source for your association. So I wanted to go back to you. Yes,
On that regard, if I may add.
of course.
You just brought a good point, and that is that making sure that the project is being done in compliance with the contract documents. It's one important aspect, but making sure that those payment applications correspond to what the work that has been done in the field. It's another thing that engineers like us we assist the associations with. Not only that, but as the project is reaching or nearing the end phase, it's important also to come up with that punch list, things that are not necessarily the way that they should be. We just put together that punch list, coordinate with the contractor, and then make sure that it is done in a timely manner. And at the end, there needs to be the acceptance of the project, so that's where we assist also the association with those different aspects of any given project.
Yeah, that punch list was a good one. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, and to Hector's point, the contract is going to provide a couple of key terms, related to what Hector just said. One, there's going to be a substantial completion date that the contractor has to achieve. Okay. Two, we want to have a liquidated damage provision in the contract to incentivize Dave to meet a substantial completion date.
Yeah.
I see him smiling.
Dave, he's beating you up, Dave.
I knew you were going to bring up LDs.
Which is going to be a penalty that the delays which are within the contractor's control, as opposed to delays caused outside of the contractor's control. Contractor's not going to be penalized for weather delays and other delays, short, delivery delays, those types of things. But if I don't have enough people on the project as the contractor and I didn't meet my substantial completion date, that's on the contractor. And then third is going to be the retention, which is a percentage of the contract price, to make sure that the contractor does Hector's punch list before that final completion certificate is issued by the engineer. And then the other important aspect and role that an engineer like Hector plays in that whole progress payment review is also making sure we're getting the partial release affidavits from the contractor, which is saying, I paid my subs up through this date for the work that you're paying me for, which avoids the claim on the payment bond. So that whole process is an administration process unto itself, which is, can be a big burden on management that really should be handled by the supervising, engineer.
Well, it's not only subcontractors that have notice or that will notice the project. It's material suppliers.
Material suppliers, sure.
Mm-hmm. All of them, yeah. They'll have a right to get paid if I don't pay them. So.
Right. Excellent point. So Steve, I'm going to leave it with you because I know from a management side, unfortunately, we heard the issue there at where the tragedy occurred, that there were owners that maybe didn't want to make certain repairs because of the cost, right? You heard special assessments, and I've seen them in buildings from as small as $1,000 to as much as $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. Can you give the board members that are listening here today, what can they do if that occurs? If they don't want to make, those payments or boards don't want to make the decision because they're getting that pressure. And then also I'm going to bring up the whole tile incident. If they don't want their tile removed from the balcony, that you brought it up, what can a board do in those cases?
All right. Well, those are some great questions. And so what I have found in my experience to be the most effective is communication. And, if anything came out of the pandemic that we could say was a positive, is, webinars like this on Zoom. And I've been part of a number of town hall meetings with my association clients that are going into these projects or are in these projects. And the most important thing I think a board can do with the assistance of management and its professionals is communicate to the owner. Let them know what to expect. Let them know why the board is making the decisions that they're making. Somebody asked, should that engineering report be disclosed to the owners? Well, if Hector comes in and does an analysis of the condominium building and he finds structural problems with it, I'm pretty sure, particularly after what has happened, if we communicate that to the owners, they're not going to be happy about reaching into their pocket, but I think they're going to be less resistant to reaching into their pocket than they were before. And so communication, holding town hall meetings, having the engineer on those calls, having the contractor on those calls, even having me on those calls, because there are going to be questions that come up. Now, when we talk about tile on balconies, again, that's a little bit more case specific to the condominium, but where you're in the unfortunate circumstance where the boundaries of the unit include the balcony, one of the things that the board can do up front is amend the documents to address that problem and make it clear that balcony tile is going to need to be removed. And once you go through the process of explaining why tile is so detrimental to the concrete and why it increase the frequency and cost of having to do concrete restoration, owners understand that it's in their best interest to not have tile on their balconies. And also, Dave can offer an alternative. He can offer a waterproofing coating on the balcony and perhaps do a tile pattern.
Correct.
Part of that process to where you get the tile effect without the detriment. And once that tile is off and that waterproofing is down, my understanding is that the manufacturers, if certain protocols are followed, will actually extend the waterproofing warranty if you can demonstrate to them you've been maintaining, the waterproofing. So otherwise, the engineer has to come up with specifications that coincide with the waterproofing material that the contractor uses, and the tile reinstallation has to be coordinated, and that's really hard to do. That's because material shortages and everything else. It becomes it really overcomplicates the project for the board and for the professionals. So
a big benefit to that tile waterproofing look is if you do have to do a repair, you have break lines in the tile that you can just repair those certain squares and
Right.
re-waterproof it right back. You don't have to tear up the whole deck.
Yeah, excellent points. And so, you mentioned, Steve, the communication, and I couldn't agree with you more. We've been promoting, just as you have, and everyone, I should say, on this webinar, on the education side. And it's not just one way. You, as a board, you should be, following, again, our footsteps and doing the same with your community and just letting them know if there's ever a time, again, to start your repairs or start planning, it's now. Again, we owe it to those individuals who have passed in that building to make sure that this never occurs again. And the communication is key. And understand, as a board, you're going to communicate, and you'll still get a small amount of residents that are attending throughout these webinars that you do or board meetings that you do. And then the day comes when you have to pass a special assessment. If you don't have the proper reserves or the loan, you're still going to have individuals that are complaining and saying, I never heard about this. But you're going to realize that because you took the right approach in communicating earlier on, that those residents that were attending will have your back and are going to support you and say, hey, the board has been doing what they needed to do. You haven't been paying attention to what's needed to be done. And you're going to see that you're going to have much more support from the community. So I think that was a great point that you brought up, Steve, on with regards to the communication. Now, Dave, I want to throw it right back at you when you were mentioning with regards to the tile. There's a lot of coordination that needs to be done when these projects are occurring. Could you talk to me a little bit about how your firm works with management, with both obviously management companies and self-managed companies, on assisting, and how much, what's the type of communication that's provided? What are the steps that are taken to make sure that there's strong communication with the residents with the work that's being done?
Well, I mean, the communication really makes or breaks these projects. Communication between the engineer and the contractor on what needs to be done. Communication before the project starts with the lawyer of terms and payment and days to complete the project. Once that's kind of complete, you put together a weekly scheduled meeting, keep everybody informed, keep the communication going between the engineer, the manager, and that way the manager can relay that information to the residents. And as long as everybody's informed and kind of on the same page as the progress is going, there should be no issues. When I see projects go poorly, it's usually the contractor's not discussing projects with the engineer or management. Then Steve gets involved and there's discrepancy on the pay apps, and it all becomes an escalating issue. So communication is key. Weekly project meetings, keeping everybody informed, notes at those weekly project meetings just to keep everybody on the same page.
Great, excellent. Thank you, Thank you, David. So Hector, I do want to ask, when there's, certain associations that have many projects going on at the same time, what does your firm recommend? I mean, do you recommend getting it all done or prioritizing in a particular order? What's your recommendation when it comes to that, when there's a lot that needs to be done?
Well, I mean, we realize that if those associations were regular scheduled maintenance have been in place over the years, the frequency of the big projects should not be that. The concrete restoration projects should not be done, too frequently, right? And those are the ones that probably tend to be pushed back. Now, when it comes to doing several projects at the same time, obviously each association has a budget and they have to put things in perspective. So it's important to prioritize, to give like kind of a ranking order, depending on the nature and the merits of each project. I can only give examples, but every building, every property needs to do a more thorough, evaluation on a case by case to determine this. But these are just examples. You have major concrete restoration in the balcony areas, and you have also allocated some money and planned a few years before to do improvements to the playground areas or the fencing, replacement of the fencing. Obviously, those things are kind of important for the overall, value of the property. But that next concrete restoration project is definitely more important. It becomes more difficult when you're comparing, a re-roofing project, which is also important. And it's important to bring to the table other members of the team, Lisa, for instance, just to see how the association is prepared, looking at their reserves, do we have to replace this component a few years before, anticipated, or, have we been pushing back on the replacement of this roofing project, several years, and now we are, getting to consider two projects of big importance to the building simultaneously. So those are the kind of things that we can say. Just the key word here is prioritize and evaluate the risk involved.
Correct.
With regard to since I know that it has been the part of the conversation with the balconies, which is a good example, we come across that as well. I think that Steve was saying that sometimes the communication is important. Getting us on board is important. Sometimes, in my experience, when we go out there, this is not definitive, but sometimes doing an initial assessment, a lot of the unit owners, they just look at the tiles, let's say. They have not necessarily, they don't see any issues to the tiles. So it's harder for them to understand that there could be other issues underneath. But sometimes we run a simple acoustical test where we check for the sound, distinctive sound for the hollow sound of the tiles. And to their surprise, then that's when they start to become more concerned and aware that, wow, I didn't know that I had this many tiles that are hollow. That's not in itself definitive. It doesn't equate or necessarily suggest that there are issues. But when they notice that, then they are more willing to then, explore or understand, the importance of looking deeper underneath. So that's, in my experience, it has worked that way.
No, and the tile thing's a big thing. And to add to that, I'm sure Steve will agree with me, is if you're going to go through the project and you're going to deal with this pain now, where you're having to remove some tiles, whatever solution you're going to put together, now may be also the time to amend your documents to enforce the specifics of what can be applied or not applied on those balconies. That way, the future board, if you're on that board or anyone else, doesn't have to deal with that situation, and it's clearly delineated within your documents, amended into the documents, and it's clear on what the protocols are for those particular balconies. So, Lisa, I mean, we've talked about a lot of things that, we need money and most associations unfortunately are just not properly reserved. So I have a question here. What's really the difference between the line of credit or just a regular loan? Like, what are the advantages and disadvantages of a line of credit?
Right. Yeah. Terry had posed that question. And right now, because the interest rates are so low, I have a lot of communities foregoing the construction line of credit and going straight with a term loan. Now, the questions have been like, if I'm requesting $600,000 line of credit and I forego that line of credit and just do a term loan, what if I finish David's project and it only costs $500,000? Well, then what they can do is use that additional money and do a principal pay down on the loan. The advantages to doing that is with a term loan, you have a fixed rate. And so you are completely locking in that rate. With the interest rates being as low as they are right now, a lot of communities are foregoing the construction line of credit because of the interest rate risk. It is a floating rate. So if you go ahead and do that construction line of credit, and a year from now, the rates have gone up, you're going to be paying a higher interest rate on the term portion of the loan. So the advantage really to doing the term loan right now is because the interest rates are low. However, should interest rates increase, then you may want to look at doing the construction line of credit because you're only paying interest only during the construction period. When you start doing a term loan, you're paying back the principal balance on that loan. So you're paying principal and interest. Now, with our bank, we don't have a prepayment penalty. So if you take out a 10-year loan and in year 9, you have enough money to pay off that loan, you can go ahead and do that. The only time a prepayment penalty would apply is if you were to refinance that loan with another financial institution. So there's both pros and cons to doing either a term loan or a construction to term loan. Another, in terms of lines of credit, we also offer emergency lines of credit. As you know, we are in hurricane season. We're already up to the letter E for Elsa. So, and it is only mid-July. So my thing is to be proactive and not reactive. Apply for that emergency line of credit. You hope you never have to use it. It's like having an insurance policy. You hope you never have to use it. But if you have that in place, and let's say the next hurricane comes through, your association sustains maybe landscaping damage. Maybe there's $20,000 worth of landscaping damage. You can reach out to our bank. We can either pay that contractor directly or put the funds right into your bank account to pay that contractor. So the emergency line of credit gives you that flexibility. Now, it cannot be used for an operating shortfall. If, that's really important. Like Raphael and management companies, they help with that to make sure that you have sufficient funds in your operating account. But let's say you don't. That's not what the line of credit is for. It's truly for disasters. Hurricanes, let's say you have a water main that breaks in your building and floods, multiple units, and now you have $50,000 worth of damage. Well, you are going to get reimbursed probably from your insurance company, but is that going to happen right away? No, it's probably not. So then you can go ahead and draw from that emergency line of credit to pay that contractor. So you have to look at it like this. If you have an emergency line of credit and something happens, you have those funds immediately available to you. If you don't get an emergency line of credit, and maybe you might want to look at just getting a credit card for your community. Now, we don't always recommend credit cards, but we can go up to 25,000. So that's kind of for immediate cash needs. And that's kind of also being financially prepared for the hurricane season itself. So that's another product that a lot of banks offer is emergency lines of credit.
Excellent point, Lisa. And I can't tell you how, especially with hurricane season, I don't even like to say the word. That, it just scares me because, those 3 to 5% deductibles on a building that's worth 20 million and a lot of associations just don't have it. And without those emergency line of credit, you really can't get through these kinds of situations. So it's important to, keep the money part front of mind. So we have about 5 minutes left. I'm going to do a rapid fire here on the questions that we have left that haven't been answered. I know the panel has been doing an amazing job, and Katie behind the scenes has been answering questions as well. I think we got to close to 63 of them. So I'm going to go ahead and relate the question to the person that I believe it belongs to, and we'll just do a quick rapid fire response. Paul asked here to Hector, what is the life expectancy of galvanized pipe and copper wiring in a 2-story inland building? You may give a Steve response. It depends.
Ouch.
I don't have the right answer at this very minute. We have an idea of what the life expectancy is for the different components that make up a building. If I may have the contact information for that person, I'll try just to reach out with the answer.
Sure, no problem.
Shortly.
So, next I have from Mel, I have a question from Mel to Steve. Is the board protected against liability?
Well, it depends. It depends on whether or not the board has, been proactive in maintaining the building, listening to its professionals and protecting the common elements. If the board is sitting on engineering reports that say work needs to be done and those reports get ignored, then I say no. I would say they're not going to be protected from liability under a D&O policy. Because, if a carrier takes the position that the board has been grossly negligent or reckless or, acted in reckless disregard for the safety of the residents, they're not going to cover a claim.
Excellent. Thank you.
It's going to be the issue down at Surfside,
Yeah.
So
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
unfortunately, yeah.
Lisa, I have a question from David. What does the emergency line of credit cost?
It varies on the amount that you request. So it goes from 100,000 up to 2 million. And what we do is we look at a balance sheet, an income statement, an accounts aging, and then we prepare a term sheet for review. So from that term sheet, it spells out what the costs are. Our emergency lines of credits are a 2-year term. And so you have an origination fee upfront when applying, but when you go to renew it, you don't have another origination fee. And with the emergency line of credit, once we look at those financials, then we're able to issue that term sheet for review.
Excellent. Thank you, Lisa. And I have 2 questions for you, Dave, and we'll wrap up. The first one is, how do you learn about tile substitutes for balconies? And the other one is, after waterproofing a balcony, as mentioned, with decorative designs, are there any other options?
There's a wide array of options. Typically, you can do some urethane deck coatings, like a pool deck finish that is a waterproofing. You can even put tile back on top of some of these urethane deck coatings. Manufacturers come out with different products every day, every year. Me and Hector know most of the manufacturers, and there's a wide array of solutions for the issues.
Excellent. Thank you.
On that regard, if I may add, the important thing is that, like David said, there are a number of products. So the appearance is important, obviously. The texture is another element to it. And, they're becoming more popular. We're coming across that request across some of our current projects. But it is important, and the key word is that it is capable to take foot traffic. That's the property that we look whenever we're specifying that.
Excellent. Well, we're wrapping up here, so I want to give everyone the opportunity maybe to provide a tip and any closing remarks as we close off the webinar. So I'll start off with you, Lisa.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. And we talked a lot about this during the webinar, and communication is key, especially when it comes to getting a loan. So we have an educational brochure, and also we're all here as a team basically to protect, maintain, and enhance your community. So we're all business partners for you, and we're here to educate and help you the best we can.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Steve?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Communication is very important. Reach out to your professionals. If you're, not funding your reserves, it's time to start looking at doing that. You got to start somewhere, and reach out to management and a reserve study specialist and start the process. And Katie wanted me to make sure I let everybody know that we're going to provide all of the attendees with all of the panelists' contact information. So if there's any follow-up questions that anybody had who attended the webinar.
And a copy of the recording.
Oh, and a copy of the recording as well. So.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steve and Katie. David, you're up.
Echo what Steve and Lisa said. Communication is key. Planning is key. Don't wait till the last minute till it becomes an emergency issue. And get yourself a team of vendors that are going to be there to help you with every facet of the project.
Thank you so much, David. Hector?
Yes, I mean, I appreciate the time of everybody that is attending this webinar. I have to I would like to say that, we are professional engineers, and we have the trained eye. However, each and every unit owner and every manager and everybody involved in the community probably is looking at things with a different perspective, especially lately. And don't hesitate to express those concerns or those things that perhaps you were not necessarily aware of. And, we can help you with those evaluating properly those concerns just to dissipate or to give you any necessary recommendations. So that's what we're here for.
Great. Thank you so much, Hector. As for myself first, I wanted to really pray for those individuals who lost their lives at Champlain Towers. We've done our best. Every organization that's here today have done their best to really, serve those individuals that have passed and honor them by really making sure that this doesn't occur again and providing education where the board members that are serving their current residents can avoid this from ever happening again. Secondly, I want to thank all of you for coming here today. It's been an honor to have you all along my side, top, bottom, left, right, being here. I appreciate everything, all the information that you guys have provided. I think it's been amazing. And lastly, I wanted to thank the ladies that work behind the scene, Ashley and Katie, for making this happen. They make us all look great, but really they're the ones that put it all together. To the board members and the managers that are attending, I want to applaud you for taking that extra step to gain additional knowledge and really becoming a strong leader, not only for your community, but for your residents as well. Thank you so much. We'll have this video as well up on our YouTube page. We'll have it probably up within the next 48 hours. We do have weekly videos coming out, so make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and please hit that thumbs up button. We'll see you at our next webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Everybody.